guys, welcome to a Daily Change of Mind. I'm Stephen Clemens. How y'all doing today? As you can see, I'm in my truck today bringing you this video because the normal spot I do this at, the power's down right now and I don't have any lighting, and I did not want to not bring you this message today, in which we're going to look at the crucifixion. The last message that I did, we looked at the flogging of Jesus Christ and what it was that he experienced. And I'm not going to review that at all, but I will read you a quote from Eusebius, which is a 3rd century historian, in which he described that flogging. And it reads, quote, "The sufferer's veins were laid bare, and the very muscles, sinews, and bowels of the victim were open to exposure." It was severe what Jesus Christ went through. As a matter of fact, many of the floggings that took place during this time left many of them dead before they even made it to the crucifixion. He went through excruciating pain and just sheer trauma from that flogging alone before he even went to the crucifixion. But today we're going to look at the crucifixion, and before I read to you today, I want you to go ahead and turn to John chapter 19, starting in verse 16. Let's actually start in verse 15. "But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto him, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Then delivered he him therefore unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. And he, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of the skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him and two other with him on either side, one and Jesus in the midst. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." So today we're going to look at the crucifixion. I'm going to read to you today from the same author as I was reading from the flogging, in which they used a shroud. Again, this is not a message on the shroud. This is just simply a message to show you what it was that Jesus experienced and some of the things that he went through during this severe crucifixion and flogging, etc. Starts off with history. It was a form of the crucifixion. It was a form of execution that was only too common at the time. The revolt of the slaves led by Spartacus ended with the crucifixion of 6,000 people. The Roman Emperor Nero had thousands of Christians of all ages crucified, and history says that a spectacle was made of it. Their bodies were coated with resin, and they were burnt like torches to light up the night. For all who had ever seen or participated in this form of execution, the cross was an object of horror. This image lasted several centuries until the Emperor Constantine banned crucifixion around 320 AD. Well, it's still being performed by other cultures, Islamic nations today in Islam. But it was probably this horror of the cross which explains why it appears so rarely as a Christian icon in the 1st century. It is not until the 5th century that the crucifix image appears, and then with Jesus placed upon it fully clothed. But when he was actually crucified, he wasn't clothed, he was completely naked. The more traditional representation of Jesus on the cross as we know it today did not appear until the Middle Ages. The condemned carried their own cross to the place of their crucifixion. In fact, what they normally carried was a cross beam to which their hands had sometimes already been nailed. And this piece of wood or crossbeam was known in Latin as the patibulum. Or patibulum, yeah. I will post pictures at the end of the video like I did on the flogging video, in which it will show you depictions of pictures of what these things were. At the crucifixion site, this patibulum, with its victim attached, was fixed onto an upright stake whose lower part was embedded or buried in the ground. This upright stake was the stipes. The word crux at first described what was just a simple stake planted in the earth. Little by little it came to mean the stipes, and finally it came to mean the complete wooden apparatus of crucifixion. The condemned carried the patibulum across their shoulders, their forearms attached to the wood by cords, unless they were already nailed to it. The weight of the patibulum would be about 20 to 30 kilos, or roughly 60 pounds. So Jesus had to roughly carry a 60-pound beam across his shoulders and back after being severely flogged to the point of almost death, in which, as I said in that quote, their veins were laid bare and the very muscles, sinews, and bowels of the victim were open to exposure, bleeding and leaking, the insides and flesh torn from the body, and he had to carry a 60-pound beam across his back after having that done to him. The images on the shroud can be related directly to the carrying of the patibulum. The outside part of the right shoulder shows a rectangle area about 4 by 4 inches, sloping at the bottom and indented. This can be interpreted as a mass of scratches superimposed on wounds caused by the flogging. A heavy, rough object was pressed on this spot. The same images can be found on the interior part of the shoulder along the line of the collarbone. The point of the left shoulder blade carries the same marks. The right knee, more bruised than the left, has many grazes as well as 2 round sores, about 1 inch in diameter, on its outside and upper surface. The left knee is less damaged but has more traces of the flogging. Wounds like this would have been produced by carrying the patibulum on the right shoulder and letting it rub the left shoulder blade. Also by falls while carrying the cross. Studying of the marks suggests first a fall on the right knee, then the beam fell backwards, grazing the right shoulder to the point of the left shoulder blade. The Gospels report the carrying of the cross, and tradition has perpetuated the memory of these 3 falls on the path to Calvary. Now we're going to look at the normal crucifixion procedure. The Roman troops had considerable experience in this matter of execution. These people, the Romans soldiers who did this, were not the lower rank soldiers who performed those. No, these were professional, trained murderers, if you will take it at that, in this form of execution. It wasn't as if this form of execution was some unknown thing, new thing. This was something they had plenty of experience in, and they were trained and professionals in performing it. One only has to read the huge number of crucifixions carried out in Roman times to see that it was a routine affair, a standard procedure that would have been carried out rapidly and efficiently. On arrival at the crucifixion site, the condemned was stripped of any remaining clothes. If not already nailed by the hands to the patibulum, the victim was probably pushed on his back and nailed to the wood. The right arm would then be pulled in the other direction and the right hand nailed in place. The condemned was then lifted to his feet, pushed towards the stipes, which is the stake in the ground, and the patibulum hoisted upon the stipes. 1 or 2 executioners then bent the victim's knees and forced his feet up a bit, while another executioner nailed them to the stipes with like a 7-inch nail. With an experienced execution squad, this part of the job would only take a few short minutes. Now we're going to look at what traces can be found on the shroud that show evidence for a crucifixion. The left wrist carries the mark of a wound. The right wrist was hidden by the left hand because of how it was wrapped in the cloth. The fact that the wound is in the wrist will surprise many, because on crucifixes it is usually shown in the center of the palm. There was a doctor who did studies using cadavers and other things that showed that it would not be possible to crucify or to put the nail here in the palm to be able to support the weight of somebody on a cross, because it would tear through the flesh. It wasn't a strong supported place. No, they would have to do it here in the wrist, which some people might say, well, that contradicts scripture because they say it's in the palm. Well, in the original language, they considered the hand from the wrist forward to be part of the entire hand. And here, they would be able to nail, and they would have support, enough rigidity, enough support, because of the way the design is of the wrist, that it would not tear through due to the weight. And I will post pictures of that. Let's see here. Close examination of the shroud shows the wound to be in the center of the carpus. This intrigued Barbette, the doctor who carried out the crucifixion tests on corpses. If he planted the nail in the middle of the palm of the hand, he found this area was not strong enough to support the weight of the body. The muscles, ligaments, and the white fibrous sheets of tissue which the muscles are attached to the bones tore as the weight of the body pulled against the nail. The hand pulled off the nail and the body fell. To get around this, it was necessary to plant the nail in something more solid, capable of resisting the large tension forces caused by the crucifixion. Taking into account the angle of the arms, the forces acting on each wrist are the equivalent of the total weight of the condemned, and not half of the weight as could be expected. This, however, let's see here. This, however, one spot situated between the palm and the wrist, which answers perfectly the needs of the crucifixion. This spot called the destot space is called the destot space. The wound that shows on the shroud corresponds exactly with this place. And again, I'll show pictures of this at the end of the video. This shows that the executioners knew their job and planted their nails with precision. From this wound, 2 trickles of blood run down the elbow, and a proof that the elbow was lower than the hand. A detail which has escaped general attention over the centuries is that the shroud does not show the thumbs, but only the 4 fingers of the hand. Although artists who have made paintings of the shroud have customarily added the thumb to their canvases, this apparent omission can be explained by the additional torture that has been shown to occur during crucifixion, meaning that the nail went into the wrist. At the moment when the nail is hammered through the destot space, it tears but does not cut the middle nerve that controls the movement of the thumb. In reaction to this damage, the nerve forces the thumb towards the center of the palm. Furthermore, and this is agonizing for the victim. By damaging the nerve and not cutting off its sensitivity to the pain, the crucified victim suffers in the hands, wrist, forearms, an excruciating nerve pain comparable to having the nerve of a tooth drilled without anesthetic by a dentist, or the pain of a sciatic nerve. Each movement of the condemned on the cross intensifies this terrible pain, and attempts by the condemned to relieve some of this pain is one of the reasons for the pattern of body movements that he will make on the cross before succumbing to death. Let's see here. It was not until this doctor that this traumatism of the middle nerve became known to him. To him, the detail alone was sufficient enough to state categorically that the shroud is authentic in that person's opinion, and had wrapped a body executed by a crucifixion. On the rear face of the forearm, on the shroud, can be seen traces of blood running from the wrist to the elbow. At intervals, these traces separate into two streams which descend vertically. This indicates that at times the condemned let all of his weight hang from his wrists, and at other times he lifted himself by taking more weight on the nails to his feet. Each struggle upwards brought on further waves of agony in those torn middle nerves, but death on the cross came from asphyxia, the result of the forces acting on the chest due to hanging from the wrist. So as long as he had strength and willpower to resist, the condemned had no choice but to lift himself higher in order to breathe. Now we're going to look at the image of the feet on the shroud. They were crossed, the left in front of the right. They're in hyperextension, showing that they have been fixed flat on the stipes of the cross, in which we can clearly see the sole of the right foot, a mark that corresponds to an exit wound of a nail that would have been nailed, could have nailed the feet to the cross. This space situated in the rear of the two spaces of the metatarsus carried the name of the doctor who studied it in detail, Dr. Merritt. Now, it doesn't matter to me whether his feet were nailed on top of each other like this, or side by side, or, as some put it, on the side of the stipes, in which they were nailed if this was your foot, they would be nailed through the heel this way, and they would have a plank of wood in between the nail and the foot like a washer, because the size of the nail head was so small it would have went torn through. So they would put a piece of wood to act like a washer so that the foot could not tear from the nail. So they would nail it this way into the heel, going into the upright stipe or pole or stake in the ground. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't disprove anything to me, no matter which way it was. I tend to think it was on the side, simply because of some archaeological evidence that they have found during that time, and I might show that on the pictures in the end of where they have found a Jewish person whose skeleton of the foot still had the nail from crucifixion in his foot from that same time period of Christ. But anyhow, there are some indirect causes, some indirect causes for his death on the crucifixion. Shock and the important loss of vitality due to the flogging and the hemorrhages that follow. The lack of food, and especially drink, which leads rapidly to dehydration with its accompanying overwhelming fatigue and headache, often intense. But the usual cause of death in crucifixion is asphyxia, caused by two factors. And we're going to look at something else also. Firstly, a mechanical blocking of the normal respiratory expansion of the thoracic cage, caused by the position of the arms extended and raised and accentuated by the weight of the body pulling the arms. Secondly, respiratory paralysis due to cramps in the respiratory muscles, mainly the diaphragm, but also in the pectoral or the chest muscles and sternocleidomastoidians, intercostal, etc. The paralysis of these muscles bring a dilation of the thoracic cage with projection of the sternum and the hollowing of the epigastrium. The forcing of the intestines downwards by the diaphragm, causing the lower part of the abdomen to bulge. The asphyxia has two consequences. The oxygen level in the blood is reduced and the carbon dioxide level goes up. This increases the acidity of the blood, causes heavy sweating, aggravating dehydration and bringing on muscular cramps. One can see on the shroud. One can see on the shroud. Certain attitudes suggesting rigidity. Head pointed slightly forward, knees slightly bent. This too can be explained. Normally, rigor mortis begins to set in about 6 hours after death. It then reaches its maximum after 18 hours and stops after about 36 hours. However, when a person dies during prolonged and intense physical exercise, the rigidity starts to set in immediately. Example, various reports of battlefield experiences mentioned that when the fighting has been long and tiring, exhausting in the real sense of the term, rigor mortis has frequently started immediately after a soldier is killed. The victim being crucified had to choose between two positions. Either he allowed himself to slump, hanging all of his weight on the nails through his wrists, whereupon he soon started asphyxiating, or at the cost of intense and exhausting effort, he lifted himself by pulling on his arms and pushing down on the nails through his feet, raising himself by a few centimeters necessary to draw breath. At the same time, everything was accompanied by intense, unending pain originating from the median nerves of the wrist, by the nails through the feet, by constant cramps in all of his muscles, by the pain caused by the blows during the flogging, and intense thirst. When you consider the barbarity and suffering in a crucifixion, one cannot help but feel nauseous. Sometimes the executioners, either through pity for the victim or boredom with the slow speed of death, broke the victim's legs with blows from an iron bar. The victim could no longer push himself up to breathe and soon died of asphyxiation. But that didn't happen to Christ. The Gospels tells us that this happened to the two thieves who were crucified at the same time as Christ. But then, when the executioners reached Jesus, they found that he already expired. And we're going to look at something interesting about that. Thus, they did not break his legs, but one of them speared his side with a lance. And St. John, who was present, adds, at once blood and water came out. And that's what I want to look at here real quick before I wrap this up, concerning the spear in the side of Christ. And in John chapter 19, starting in verse, see here. When Jesus therefore, see here. See. When Jesus therefore, this is in John chapter 19, starting in verse 30. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. The Jews therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath day, because that's normally what would happen during crucifixion, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Then came the soldiers and brake the legs of the first and of the others which were crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they broke not his legs, fulfilling Scripture. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came out blood and water. I want to underline that, because there was a study done concerning this detail that John recorded, which I believe further shows the accuracy of what was being said here, that they had a true account of what was being said here. Why be so accurate of saying blood than water? So I'm going to read something to you. A medical doctor named Samuel Houghton, or Houghton, I don't know exactly how you pronounce that, a physiologist from the University of Dublin, wrote the following concerning the physical cause of death, saying, quote, "When the soldier that we just read pierced with his spear the side of Christ, he was already dead." That's what we read. And the flow of blood and water that followed was either a natural phenomenon explicable by natural causes, or it was a miracle. That St. John thought of it, if not be miraculous, at least to be unusual, appears plainly from the comment he makes upon it, and from the emphatic manner in which he solemnly declares his accuracy of narrating it. Repeated observations and experience made upon men and animals have led me to the following result. When the left side of the body is freely pierced after death by a large knife, comparable in size to that of a Roman spear, 3 distinct cases may be noted. 1. The first, no flow of any kind follows the wound, except a slight trickling of blood. Second, a copious flow of blood only follows the wound. And third, a flow of water only, succeeded by a few drops of blood, follows the wound. Of these 3 cases, the first is that which usually occurs. The second is found in cases of death by drowning and by strychnia, and may be demonstrated by destroying an animal with poison, and it can be proved to be the natural case of a crucified person. And the third is found in cases of death from pleurisy, pericarditis, and rupture of the heart. With the foregoing cases, most anatomists who have devoted their attention to this subject are familiar. But the 2 following cases, although readily explicable on physiological principles, are not recorded in the books except by John. Nor have I been fortunate enough to meet with them. Fourth, a copious flow of water succeeded by a copious flow of blood follows the wound. And fifth, a copious flow of blood succeeded by a copious flow of water follows the wound. Death by crucifixion causes a condition of blood in the lungs similar to that produced by drowning and strychnia. The fourth case would occur in a crucified person who had previously to crucifixion suffered from pleuritic effusion, and the fifth case would occur in a crucified person who had died upon the cross from rupture of the heart. The history of the days preceding the Lord's crucifixion effectually excludes the supposition of pleurisy, which is also out of the question of blood first, then water afterwards, following the wound. There remains, therefore, no supposition possible to explain the recorded phenomenon, except the combination of the crucifixion and rupture of the heart. That rupture of the heart was the cause of death of Christ is ably maintained by Dr. William Stroud, and that rupture of the heart actually occurred, I firmly believe. The Apostle John recorded a minutely detailed description of his observation at Golgotha. Houghton came to the following conclusions. The importance of this is obvious. It shows that the narrative of John could never have been invented. The fact recorded must have been seen by an eyewitness, and the eyewitness was so astonished that he apparently thought the phenomenon miraculous. The fact that John recorded there came out blood and water, I think it just adds to the accuracy of their eyewitness testimony of what happened to Jesus, and that he died of heart failure on the cross. That's why he was already dead and didn't need to break his legs, fulfilling prophecy, so on and so forth. So I'm running out of time. I gotta wrap this up right now, but I hope you all got something out of this message, and that, like I said, I will post some pictures towards the end of the video to show you what these different things were that I referenced. And there's no doubt that Jesus Christ suffered a horrible death, and that there was no way that he could have survived any of this. No way anybody could survive any of this. So that's my message for today. I'll put it on Facebook and on YouTube. And with that, I'll talk to y'all later.